Hey guys, and welcome to another episode of Ireland Crimes and Mysteries. I want to thank you for joining me today, and if you're a returning listener, I want to say a big thank you for your continued support. If this is your first time listening to my podcast, welcome. It's great to have you on board. So without further ado, let's get started on today's story. Ireland Crimes and Mysteries is presented by Go Loud, Ireland's leading audio publisher and the home of Irish podcasts. Find new episodes on the podcast first on the Go Loud app and on your favourite podcast platform. There is a terraced house on Grattan Street in Youghal, County Cork. A 4-storey building close to the waterfront of that East Cork town, with a sitting room, a kitchen, dogs running in the garden, and a man inside who told everyone who would listen that he was a broken-hearted husband waiting for his wife to come home. For 6.5 years, he gave interviews. He wept on camera. He begged her to ring someone, anyone, just to let people know she was safe. He brought flowers to her family at Christmas. He hand-delivered a birthday card signed with both their names. He stood in his sitting room and pointed to the unopened bottle of cava he said he was saving for the day she walked back through the door. And all the while, Tina Satchwell was beneath his feet, beneath the concrete floor, behind a hastily built brick wall in a grave just over a metre deep, wrapped in black plastic sheeting, still wearing her pyjamas and her dressing gown. The belt of that dressing gown was found around her neck. She had been there since March 2017. Garda had searched the house in June of that same year. Nobody found her. 6.5 years passed, and Richard Satchwell kept talking to the cameras. I'm Nules, and this is Ireland Crimes and Mysteries. Today we're talking about Tina Satchwell, born Tina Dingavan in Fermoy, County Cork, a woman described by everyone who loved her as kind, gentle, bubbly and glamorous. A woman who rescued stray animals, who had a sharp sense of style, who was loyal to people she called her own. And a woman whose husband, Richard Satchwell, originally from Leicester in England, was convicted of her murder by a unanimous jury verdict at the Central Criminal Court in Dublin on the 30th of May 2025. He was sentenced to life imprisonment on the 4th of June 2025. The judge who sentenced him noted that he had staged a theatrical performance of grief for years while knowing exactly where his wife's remains lay. His conviction stands at the time of recording. An appeal has been lodged. This is a story about coercive control, about a woman whose world was slowly closed in on her by the man she married, about an investigation that, by the admissions of those who ran it, fell short in the early years, and about the family members who never, ever stopped looking for her. Let's start at the beginning. Tina Dingavan was born on the 30th of November 1972 in Fermoy, County Cork. She grew up on St Bernard's Place, a street in the centre of that North Cork town, raised by her grandmother, Florence Dingavan, alongside Florence's own children, who Tina believed were her brothers and sisters. But within that family, there was a secret, and like many family secrets, it had a cost. Tina was a teenager when she discovered the truth. As she prepared for her confirmation and sought her birth certificate, she learned that the woman she had believed was her sister, a woman named Mary Collins, was in fact her biological mother. The woman she called Granny, Florence Dingavan, had raised her as her own, and while Tina was raised by her grandmother, Mary had kept 2 other daughters. Lorraine, who Tina had believed was her aunt, was in fact her half-sister, and there was another daughter too, a younger girl named Sarah, who Tina had grown up believing was her niece, and who was, in truth, her half-sister as well. It is one of the most quietly poignant threads of this entire story, that the woman who would become one of Tina's closest family members, the woman who would stand up in court years later and read a victim impact statement demanding justice for her, was someone Tina had loved and called her niece her entire life, when in truth they were half-sisters who shared the same mother. The family called Sarah Tina's cousin, which was the term that would be used throughout the trial and in all formal settings. But the relationship was far more layered than that word suggested. According to family testimony at the trial, Tina carried feelings of abandonment and resentment from that discovery. She sided fiercely with her grandmother in family disputes. The foundations of her early life had been shaken by what she'd found out. Yet, what everyone who knew Tina remembers is not the pain of that background, but the light of who she was. She was described in court and in her community as genuinely lovely, bubbly and kind. She had a warmth that people noticed immediately. She had a love of fashion, a room full of clothes at home, an eye for colour, a way of presenting herself that made people notice when she walked into a room. Glamorous was the word people used, not showy glamorous, there is a difference. And she loved animals. She and Lorraine had brought stray animals to the vet as children, scraped together whatever they had to help a creature in distress. In later years, she had two beloved dogs, Ruby and Heidi, whom she treated by all accounts as her children. She had a parrot named Pearl. These animals were central to her life, and the significance of that would become important later on. In the late 1980s, following the breakdown of her grandparents' marriage, the family relocated to England. Tina was 17 years old when she moved to Colville, a village near Leicester, to live with her grandmother. It was there that she met Richard Satchwell. Richard was from Leicester. His brother lived just a few doors down from where Tina was now staying, on the same street as Tina's aunt. He was 22 years old when he first saw her. According to his own account, he was immediately and completely taken with her. He told his brother he was going to marry that girl. The couple began dating in the spring of 1989. Richard came over to Ireland with her in June of that year to meet her family. And in 1990, on Tina's 20th birthday, they married in Oldham, England. No members of Richard's family attended. They did not approve of the relationship. The couple returned to Ireland, settling first in Fermoy, where they would live for more than 2 decades before eventually moving to Youghal in 2016. Richard worked as a lorry driver. Tina had no recorded employment and did not drive. Their world, by all accounts, was largely contained to each other and to their pets, their car boot sales and their corner of County Cork. From the outside, the marriage appeared unremarkable in the way that long marriages sometimes do. But evidence at trial painted a picture of a relationship that had become, over many years, deeply restrictive for Tina. Lorraine Howard, Tina's half-sister, testified that Richard was obsessive and possessive about his wife. He was always with her. He monitored who she spoke to. He found fault with her friends and her social connections. And over the years, those connections dwindled. The people around Tina fell away one by one until her circle had shrunk considerably. The prosecution at trial described Richard as having treated Tina like a trophy, like a possession to be dressed up and kept close. He described extraordinary domestic rituals, running her baths with as many suds as possible, toweling her off, applying lotions to her skin, removing and replacing her toenail polish on Sunday evenings while being careful never to touch her fingernails, which he considered precious. He claimed to know the precise size of every item of clothing she owned, down to her underwear. He attended medical appointments with her, a detail their GP described in court as highly unusual and one that, she said, smacked of controlling behaviour. According to Tina's family, she had confided that she felt she could not escape him, that if she tried to leave, he would follow her to the ends of the earth. Richard himself had acknowledged leaving for England briefly around 2002 and claimed that Tina had never forgiven him for that. In March 2017, he would tell an animal organisation by email that his wife was threatening to leave him. Whether that was a statement of fact or a calculated piece of misdirection is something the jury considered very carefully. Tina was 44 years old when she was murdered in March of 2017. She would never have the chance to tell her own story. But in the years since her death, the people who loved her have made sure, repeatedly, that the version of Tina the world hears is the true one, not the portrait her husband tried to construct. In the words of of Sarah Howard. Tina was their precious sister, cousin, auntie and daughter. She was caring, gentle and loyal to those she loved. By 2016, Richard and Tina Satchwell had left Fermoy and moved to Youghal. Their new home was number 3 Grattan Street, a tall, terraced building near the waterfront of that East Cork town. The house was in the middle of significant renovation work, much of it done by Richard himself. This included structural work beneath the stairs and construction of a walk-in wardrobe for Tina's extensive clothing collection, concrete plasterwork, a newly built red brick wall under the stairway. All of this, as investigators would later note, would become very relevant. On Sunday, the 19th of March 2017, the couple attended a car boot sale in Carrigtwohill. This was the last time Tina Satchwell was seen alive by anyone outside that house. People who saw her there remembered her clearly. Colourful, glamorous, vibrant. She had bought a black jacket and a dress, and according to Richard's later account, hung them over a door in the living room when she got home. That evening, they returned home and ate together. By Monday morning, the 20th of March 2017, Tina Satchwell was dead. What happened in that house that Monday morning is at the heart of this case, and it is, ultimately, contested territory. What we know with certainty is that Tina never left. What Richard Satchwell told the world for 6.5 years was a lie. Richard's account, the one he gave to Garda, to the media, to anyone who asked, was as follows. He claimed that on the morning of March the 20th, he had started doing housework chores in the very early hours, around 5:30 in the morning. He made Tina breakfast at 9 o'clock. She allegedly asked him to drive to Dungarvan, some 30 kilometres away in County Waterford, to buy items including parrot food at the local Aldi. He said he left just after 10 in the morning. When he returned in the early afternoon, he said the house was empty. He said he found her house keys on the floor, her mobile phone was on the kitchen table. The 2 dogs, Ruby and Heidi, were left in the sitting room. And he claimed that a sum of approximately €26,000 in cash, which he said was stored in a money box in the attic, was gone, along with 2 suitcases. He suggested that Tina had left of her own accord, to get her head straight perhaps, that she might have gone to England, that the money was proceeds from the sale of their Fermoy home, kept in cash because he was in receipt of social welfare and didn't want it passing through the bank. There were immediate and fundamental problems with this account. The dogs. Anyone who knew Tina Satchwell knew she would never, under any circumstances, travel without Ruby and Heidi. Those dogs were her babies. The idea that she would leave voluntarily and abandon them was, to her family, simply not credible. Sarah Howard told Garda the moment she heard the dogs were still in the house, she was alarmed. The phone, the bank account, the passport. Tina had not used her mobile phone after the 20th of March. Her bank account had not been touched. She had no passport. There was no record of her passing through any Irish or British port or airport. There was no digital trace of her anywhere after that morning. The money. A forensic accountant examined the couple's finances and gave evidence at trial that the €26,000 simply did not exist. The couple's bank account was overdrawn through 2015 to 2017. After the sale of the Fermoy house and the purchase of the Grattan Street property, just €372 remained in liquid funds. There was no hidden cash. There never had been. And the reporting delay? Richard Satchwell did not contact Garda for 4 days. He went to Fermoy Garda station, not to Youghal, where his wife had supposedly gone missing, but to Fermoy, 43 kilometres away. And he went there on the evening of Friday, the 24th of March, 2017. His initial inquiry was casual. He did not present as a man gripped by panic or fear that his wife was missing, or for her safety. He told the Garda on duty he had no concerns for her welfare and believed she had left due to deterioration in their relationship. But the most significant problem with Richard's account was one that would take investigators some time to fully piece together. and it went directly to the heart of whether he was ever in Dungarvan at all on that morning. CCTV footage from Youghal post office in the town where the couple lived showed Richard Satchwell in those premises at approximately 11 o'clock on the morning of the 20th of March 2017. That is the precise time he claimed to have been in Dungarvan doing the shopping. He was not in Dungarvan. He was collecting his social welfare payment in Youghal. Own location data then placed him back at the Grattan Street house by approximately 20 past 11 that morning. And the data showed him remaining in the house until close to 1 o'clock in the afternoon. And there is one more piece of digital evidence from that morning. At 22 minutes to 11 on the 20th of March, while Tina Satchwell's body, according to Richard's own later account, was already in that house, an email was sent from a device connected to Richard to the animal organisation the couple had been dealing with. The email said, "I'm in a mess right now because my wife has said she is leaving me over this." Prosecution counsel Geraldine Small told the jury that this email was a calculated attempt to manufacture a contemporaneous digital record, to plant evidence in real time, suggesting Tina was alive and threatening to leave that very morning. It was only after Tina's remains were discovered in October 2023 that Richard changed his story. He then told Gardaí that on that same morning, he had found Tina at the bottom of the stairs with a chisel in her hand, scraping the plasterboard he had put up. He said she flew at him with it when he asked what she was doing. He fell backwards. She was on top of him trying to stab him in the head. He said he had to protect himself. He grabbed the belt of her dressing gown and held her weight off him. She went limp, he said, and she was dead in his arms. He told Gardaí he placed her body on the sofa. 2 days later, he moved her to a chest freezer in the shed. And on the 26th of March, 6 days after her death, he dug a grave under the sitting room stairs, wrapped her in black plastic sheeting and lowered her body in and cemented over the top. The prosecution characterised this account as, in Geraldine Small's words, absolute nonsense. A story with more holes than a block of Swiss cheese. They argued it was constructed specifically because 6.5 years of burial had endured that no cause of death could ever be established by a pathologist. By hiding the body, Richard had tried to make his own self-defence story impossible to disprove. The jury, ultimately, did not believe him. The investigation into Tina Satchwell's disappearance lasted more than 6 years, and it is an investigation that, in its later stages, came to be examined closely, both for its eventual breakthrough and for the questions it raised about how the early years were handled. When Richard finally reported his wife missing on that evening of the 24th of March 2017, Garda began an inquiry that would eventually involve approximately 400 lines of investigation, over 100 hours of CCTV footage being reviewed, and statements from 170 individuals. Ports and airports were checked, Interpol was contacted, reported sightings were followed up. The picture that emerged was of a woman who had not left Ireland, who had not passed through any border or accessed any money or made contact with a single person who she knew. On the 7th of June 2017, less than 3 months after Tina had supposedly gone missing, Garda conducted a search of the Satchwell home at Grattan Street. Officers noted the ongoing home improvements work. They saw the newly laid plasterboard. They saw the red brick wall that had been built into the area under the stairs. A forensic scientist used a chemical called Blue Star to check the stairway and the hallway for the presence of blood. Nothing was found. Electronic devices, including laptops, were seized. Tina's body was already in the ground beneath the stairs when those Gardaí walked through that house. The grave was there, but the search was not invasive. The concrete floor was not broken up. A cadaver dog was not used. The walled alcove under the stairs was not opened. Retired Detective Inspector Pat Murray, who was not involved in the case but who spoke publicly about it after the conviction, was direct. He said, in his view, the murder investigation fell short because the initial search was not intrusive. A cadaver dog should have been deployed in 2017. That, he said, was a huge miss. And here's something that makes the missed opportunity even more stark. Those laptops that were seized in June of 2017 contained critical evidence, but that evidence was not fully analysed for years. When Detective Garda David Kelleher eventually examined the contents of the seized laptop, this was not done until several years into the investigation. He discovered that on the evening of Friday the 24th of March 2017, the same evening Richard walked into Fermoy Garda station to report Tina missing, a Google search for quicklime was made on that laptop at 9:09. Quicklime, which has applications as an odour suppressant and has historically been used to mask the smell of decomposing remains. 19 seconds after that search, a YouTube video was clicked into, showing quicklime and water interacting. Detective Kelleher told the Central Criminal Court that the timing of that search was, in his words, extremely important, given what investigators would later discover about where Tina's body had been concealed. The information was in the seized laptop from the very beginning. It simply was not found until the years had passed. In August 2017, the Garda Water Unit, assisted by the Irish Coast Guard, searched Youghal Harbour at low tide. In March of 2018, a major 12-day search involving 60 personnel and cadaver dogs was conducted at Mitchell's Wood near Castlemartyr in County Cork, following a tip that a woman had been seen entering the woods. No trace of Tina was found. And throughout all of this, Richard Satchwell was talking to the media. The jury at his trial watched 14 video clips of Richard making media appeals and statements in the years after Tina's disappearance. He appeared on RTÉ's Crime Call alongside Tina's aunt, Margaret Maher, in June of 2017. He gave interviews on the Ray D'Arcy show in March of 2018. He spoke to Red FM. He appeared on Ireland AM on what was then TV3. And in each interview, he wept. He begged Tina to come home. He said his arms were open and waiting. He said he had never laid a finger on her. In one interview, he suggested she was too much in love with herself to commit suicide. He planted seeds consistently about her mental health, claiming she had undiagnosed psychiatric conditions, that she could be volatile, that she had a pattern of threatening to leave. On Primetime Investigates in January 2018, he brought a reporter into the house. He showed her their pets. He showed her an unopened bottle of cava he said he was saving for the day Tina came home. On that programme, a brief clip of Tina's own voice was played, one of the very few pieces of footage in which she was ever heard. She is seen speaking softly to her parrot, Pearl. The court heard this clip during the trial. It is the voice of a woman whose husband knew exactly where she was. He was, all the while, selling her clothes at car boot sales. Another woman testified that she had attended a car boot sale in Blarney in April of 2017, just weeks after Tina's death, and saw Richard selling Tina's boots and clothes from his stall. He told her that Tina had gone to the UK after contracting a serious respiratory infection from mould in the house. In late March 2017, 10 days after Tina's murder, Richard texted her cousin Sarah Howard, offering her a large chest freezer free of charge. Sarah, who described this as very unusual because Richard was not the kind to just give stuff away, did not take it. He then advertised it on Done Deal the following day as working perfectly and free to take away, just needs a clean. Richard Satchwell had stored Tina's body in that freezer for 2 days before burying her. The jury heard this evidence and saw that advertisement. In August 2017, he hand-delivered a birthday card to Sarah Howard, signed with both his and Tina's names. He was simultaneously involving her family in his performance of grief and disposing of evidence. Then, in November 2017, on what would have been the couple's 27th wedding anniversary, he made another emotional public appeal, addressing Tina directly and begging her to make contact. Breakthrough in this case came in August 2021, when Superintendent Anne-Marie Toomey was appointed as the Senior Investigating Officer. She and Detective Garda David Kelleher undertook a complete line-by-line review of everything that had been gathered over the previous 4 years. By early 2022, Superintendent Toomey had formed the view that there was reasonable grounds to believe Tina Satchwell was not a living person and had met her death through unlawful means. By August 2022, she had formed the view that Richard Satchwell was a suspect. Superintendent Toomey brought in Dr. Niamh McCullough, a forensic archaeologist with special expertise in domestic homicide and clandestine burial. Dr. McCullough identified the pattern of this case as consistent with what she had studied. The vast majority of victims in such circumstances are found within 1 kilometre of their home address, and very often within the home itself. The renovation work ongoing in the Grattan Street house at the time of the disappearance. The concrete, the new brick wall beneath the stairs was, she told the court, a major red flag. In October 2023, Superintendent Toomey obtained a warrant to conduct an invasive search of the property. On the 10th of October, Richard Satchwell was arrested. The case was upgraded to a murder investigation. The following day, the 11th of October 2023, a cadaver dog named Fern made a significant indication in the alcove beneath the sitting room stairs. Detective Garda, Brian Barry, noted that the concrete in that area appeared to be a newer pour, a different colour and consistency to the surrounding floor. There was also a crudely built red brick wall alongside. Contractors removed the concrete. Beneath it, at a depth of 64 centimetres, was a layer of black plastic sheeting. Forensic archaeologists excavated carefully. At a depth of 84 centimetres, they found the decomposed remains of an adult female, wrapped in black plastic, lying face down in the grave. She was still wearing pyjamas and a dressing gown. The belt of the gown was found around her neck. The grave fill contained mixed soils, strips of plastic, red sandpaper, and a plastic item with the best before date of 3rd of March 2017, a date just over 2 weeks before Tina's murder. On the 12th of October 2023, the remains were moved to Cork University Hospital for post-mortem examination. Dental records confirmed the identity on the 13th of October. The cause of death could not be established due to advanced decomposition. 15 small shards of heat-treated glass were recovered from the remains, including 4 from the skull. The woman beneath the stairs was Tina Satchwell. Richard Satchwell was rearrested at a bus stop in Youghal at around noon on the 12th of October 2023. He was charged that evening with her murder. It was only then, faced with the reality of the discovery, that he changed the story he had maintained for 6.5 years. The trial of Richard Satchwell for the murder of his wife opened at the Central Criminal Court in Dublin on the 28th of April 2025. The trial had been moved from Cork to Dublin at the request of the defence, who successfully argued that the volume of media coverage in Cork, much of it generated by Richard Satchwell himself, made it impossible to impanel an impartial jury there. The judge swore in a jury of 7 women and 5 men and warned them to approach the evidence objectively, given the scale of prior publicity. Richard Satchwell, 58 years old, a lorry driver from Leicester in England who had lived in County Cork for over 2 decades, entered a formal plea of not guilty to the murder of his wife at Grattan Street, Youghal, between the 19th and the 20th of March 2017. The prosecution was led by Geraldine Small SC. The defence was led by Brendan Grahan SC. The trial would last 23 days and hear evidence from more than 50 witnesses. From the outset, the defence made a concession that was, in itself, extraordinary. Richard Satchwell had caused Tina's death. That much Brendan Grahan acknowledged. The argument being made was that the death had occurred during a struggle in which Tina attacked her husband with a chisel and that he lacked the intent required for murder. The appropriate verdict, the defence argued, was manslaughter, not murder. Grahan described his client in closing as a man who was, whatever else, besotted and obsessed with his wife. He pointed to the unusual domestic rituals Richard described, running her baths, applying lotion to her skin, carefully removing her nail varnish, and argued these reflected a deep attachment. He noted that Richard knew the precise size of every item of Tina's clothing. He raised evidence from their GP that Tina had, on at least one occasion, told someone she had slapped Richard when she was 18. He suggested the jury had to consider the possibility that the dynamic in that marriage was not entirely as the prosecution described. He also significantly raised the failures of the initial Garda investigation. There was, Graham told the jury, plenty of blame to go around in this case. A laptop containing a quicklime search had sat unanalysed for years. The house had been searched in 2017 without a cadaver dog, without breaking the concrete, without looking beyond that new brick wall. What a different case we might have, he said, had matters progressed in a different way. The prosecution, meanwhile, constructed a picture of deliberate, systematic deception. Geraldine Small told the jury that Richard Satchwell was an arc manipulator who had lied repeatedly and relentlessly over years with a single purpose: to escape responsibility for killing his wife. He had been, she said, shamelessly brazen to the very end. She pointed to the financial forensics. There was no €26,000. There never had been. She pointed to the CCTV from Youghal post office showing Richard collecting his dole on the morning of the murder, at the exact time he claimed to have been in Dungarvan shopping. She pointed to the phone location data, placing him at the house until nearly 1 o'clock that afternoon. She pointed to the email sent that morning saying his wife was threatening to leave, which, she told the jury, was a calculated attempt to plant a contemporaneous alibi. She pointed to the quicklime search made that very evening he reported Tina missing, while her body, on his own later account, lay in their home. She pointed to the chest freezer offered to Sarah Howard 10 days after the murder, and then advertised on Dundee the following day. All it needed was a clean. She pointed to the birthday card, hand-delivered months later, signed with both their names. And she pointed to the most fundamental fact of all. Richard Satchwell had hidden his wife's body for 6.5 years, ensuring that the cause of her death could never be established. He had done that, she argued, precisely so that no pathologist could ever contradict whatever story he chose to tell. The jury also heard from Lorraine Howard, Tina's half-sister. Lorraine testified that she had never seen Tina be violent or aggressive towards Richard. She described the relationship as one in which Richard was obsessive and controlling, always present, always monitoring. She acknowledged under cross-examination that she had once overheard Tina say she had slapped Richard when she was 18, but she had never, in decades, seen Tina be violent. Sarah Howard gave evidence about the chest freezer text. She became emotional on the stand, describing how she had received that message, that offer of a free freezer from a man whose wife had supposedly just walked out the door. She said it was very unusual, very strange. She said the last time she had been at his car boot stall with her children, he had charged them 50 cents each for a nail varnish and a CD. Richard Satchwell exercised his right to silence and did not give evidence during the trial. In the 4th week, the defence applied to have the murder charge withdrawn and replaced with manslaughter, arguing there was no evidence on which the jury could safely find the intent required for murder. Mr. Justice Paul McDermott, who had taken over trial proceedings, rejected the application. He noted that intent for murder can be formed in a moment or over time, and that evidence of intent is drawn from surrounding circumstances. He pointed to the prolonged concealment, the consistent deception, the absence of any call to emergency services, and the pattern of behaviour before and after Tina's death as matters from which the jury could draw inference. Critically, he also noted that the reason no cause of death could be established was because Richard Satchwell had hidden the body. The jury was entitled to consider that fact. The jury deliberated for 9 hours and 28 minutes across 4 days. On Friday, the 30th of May 2025, at about 12:30 in the afternoon, the verdict was read. Guilty of murder. Members of Tina's family wept in the public gallery. 4 members of the jury also cried. Richard Satchwell, seated in the dock in a navy jumper and navy slacks, placed his head in his hands and showed no emotion. On the 4th of June 2025, Mr. Justice Paul McDermott imposed the mandatory sentence of life imprisonment. The sentence was backdated to the 12th of October 2023, the date Richard went into custody. The judge expressed his condolences to the Dingovan family before imposing that sentence. Outside the court, Superintendent Toomey said her team was thankful the investigation had provided answers and a measure of justice for Tina's family. She said no resolution could erase the pain of the loss, but she hoped the conclusion of the case brought some comfort. It was confirmed that day that Richard Satchwell had 14 previous convictions, including larceny from a shop, taking a checkbook from an employer, cheque fraud, social welfare fraud, driving without insurance, and public order offences, all between 1999 and 2004. His defence counsel confirmed he intended to appeal the murder conviction. That appeal was lodged in August 2025 and is pending before the Court of Appeal. His conviction stands at the time of this recording. When the verdict came through, the reaction in Youghal was immediate. People came to the house on Grattan Street. Flowers were placed on the windowsill. Small trinkets appeared on the ledge outside. A local florist, whose business is just a short distance from the house, said she had passed it the morning before the verdict and told Tina she hoped she would get justice, and now she had. Another local woman said that Tina wouldn't have hurt a fly. She said the only time she had ever seen Tina stiffen up was when Richard was with her. That Tina couldn't talk to anybody properly if he was about. She said she thought Tina had wanted to walk away from him and that he hadn't wanted that, because it would have made him look like a loser. The victim impact statements delivered to Mr. Justice McDermott on sentencing day were among the most powerful moments in a trial, full of them. Lorraine Howard, Tina's half-sister, told the court that Richard Satchwell had put their family through the ultimate hell of not knowing what had happened to Tina for years. He was, she said, the master manipulator who had kept them believing she would one day return. Having taken her life, Lorraine said, he didn't even have the decency to give them her body and let them mourn and bury her with the dignity she deserved. She said he had spread the rubble from Tina's grave around their most special places. She said he had treated the body of their dog Heidi, who had died after Tina and was cremated and given a proper shrine, with more respect than he had treated Tina's remains. She said no sentence would ever be enough for the monster who had taken her sister. He had wanted Tina where he could still have ultimate control, Lorraine said, in his home, under the stairs. Sarah Howard told the court that she could not comprehend how someone who had claimed to love Tina could do something so cruel. She spoke about the chest freezer. She said that was one of the things she did not think she would ever overcome, knowing that Richard had placed Tina's body inside it and then, a few days later, texted her to offer it as a gift. She said she was horrified to think she could have taken it into her family home. She asked what kind of a person could do that. She asked the court to consider not just the crime, but the cruelty that followed it. The deception, she said, the stolen years, the false hope he gave all that one day she might turn up. The family had given Tina back her maiden name. In the victim impact statements, in the statements made outside the court, they called her Tina Dingovan. That reclamation was deliberate and meaningful. She was not defined by her marriage. She was defined by the family that had raised her on St. Bernard's Place in Fermoy, by the animals she loved, by the person she was before her world was closed in around her. After the trial, Tina's family told the media that during the proceedings, she had been portrayed in a way that was not true to who she was. That Tina was not the volatile, disturbed woman the defence had described. She was a kind, loving, gentle soul. That is how they want her to be remembered. The conclusion of the case triggered a significant public and political conversation about the investigation itself. Labour Justice spokesman Alan Kelly asked publicly why it had taken so long to find Tina when red flags had apparently been visible for years. Sinn Féin Justice spokesman Matt Carty pointed to the 4-year gap between Tina's disappearance and Superintendent Toomey's appointment in 2021 and suggested there may be grounds for the Office of the Police Ombudsman to examine whether the initial investigation was adequate. Garda Commissioner Drew Harris said publicly that a review of the investigation would be carried out. That review would include consideration on whether a cadaver dog should have been deployed during the original 2017 search of the house, a search that took place while Tina's body lay in a grave beneath the floor. There is also the question of the laptop seized from the house in 2017. It was not analysed for several years. On it lay that quicklime search from March of 2017. Also, the email from the morning of the murder. Location data contradicting Richard's account of his movements. That information was available from the beginning. It was simply not identified as critical until years later, when Detective Garda Kelleher began his quite systematic review from an incident room in Carrigtwohill. In October 2023, when Tina's remains were finally brought home to Fermoy, hundreds of people lined the streets of St Bernard's Place, the street she had grown up, to say their goodbyes. Family, friends and neighbours stood on their doorsteps as the cortege passed. Her uncle, Frankie, who had grown up like a brother to her, stood silently outside the house where they had been raised as children. Her remains were cremated at the Island Crematorium in Ringaskiddy, County Cork. Half of her ashes were placed with her beloved grandmother Florence, who had raised her. The other half were buried in a second resting place her family chose for her. The case of Tina Satchwell stands now as a landmark in Irish criminal history. For the forensic archaeology that finally found her, for the pattern of coercive control that preceded her death, for the extraordinary and sustained performance of manipulation that followed it, and for the family that refused to accept the story they had been fed and refused to let her be forgotten. Tina was 44 years old when she was murdered in the home on Grattan Street in March 2017. She deserved better. She deserved the chance to walk away when she wanted to. Richard Satchwell is serving a mandatory life sentence for her murder. His appeal is pending. Tina Dingavan is remembered. She deserves life on her own terms. Let's all remember Tina Dingavan. So guys, that's it for today's episode of the Ireland Crimes and Mysteries podcast. Again, thanks for your listenership, and don't forget to subscribe to the show and hit that auto download so you never miss an episode. Until the next time, keep your eyes open and your mind curious. This podcast has been compiled from information gathered in the public sphere, like news articles, documentaries and open source material that can be found on the web. Everything in this podcast is alleged unless a conviction has taken place.